marriage and family in building such a world. Thank you so much.
You outlined well, I think, the content of you today. We're going to maybe back in 10 minutes. You know,
family policies. And we have a very distinguished panel. We are running somewhat behind time. We're also, I'm afraid, at the moment missing one of our panelists because she's caught, like the rest of us were at the beginning, at the security. But I'm informed that Heine Hanshin is trying to rescue her and bring her here as quickly as possible. But we will proceed anyway with the program because we have to stop at 1 o'clock. And I want to proceed without further ado to introduce our first speaker, who is Mr. Harry Benson. Harry Benson comes from a military background. He was a Navy pilot in the British Navy and fought in the Falklands War. Wrote a best-selling military novel about that experience called Scram. He's an expert on marriage and family breakdown and does research and counselling in that area. And he works for an organisation in the UK, which is the preeminent organisation to do with promoting marriage and family, which is called the Marriage Foundation. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Mr. Harry Benson to give his presentation.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting me to this distinguished conference. I'm going to talk about how government policy can or can't weaken marriage and family and whether it has. So I thought, for the title of my talk today, I'm going to talk about whether how government can influence policy to get couples to split up. In other words, has government made the whole problem a whole lot worse? Is government the reason why we have this family breakdown problem or not? And in order to address that question, I want to look at something, I want to look at what the data says to us. And I'm going to focus on the United Kingdom. We have an abundance of excellent data in the United Kingdom. We have fabulous data. And I hope you'll forgive me for not dealing with the rest of Europe and the rest of the world. I have some data on there as well, but I know the United Kingdom best, and I think it will be able to inform your discussions in other countries from our experience here. So take what you can from our experience here. So what does the actual data tell us, and what does theory tell us? And from that, I hope to be able to answer the question of what policies might have made it worse, if at all. So let's just start off by having a look at family breakdown in the UK. Since 1970, there were 500,000 lone parent families in the UK in 1970. Today there are 2 million lone parent families, a huge rise. But one thing I think you'll note from this chart has been that the rise in family breakdown has been pretty consistent regardless of which government has been in power, regardless of what social policies, economic policies, and all the other ups and downs have taken place. Now what's striking about this is that the really big rise in family breakdown from 1980 to today, where it was 1 million couples, 1 million lone parent families in 1980 to 2 million lone parent families today, that doubling of family breakdown has taken place while divorce rates have actually been relatively stable and even in recent years gone down. UK divorce rates are now 20% lower than they were in the 1990s. And that's been driven entirely by the improvement of marriage in the early years, entirely due to that. So if it's not divorce that's driving family breakdown, then it must be the collapse of unmarried couples. And I think this chart is very illustrative, that shows you, since going way back in history to 1850, the extent to which couples had babies outside of marriage back in 1850 was pretty much the same as it was in 1900 and in 1950. And the big change really happened in the early 1970s, when suddenly cohabitation took off. And I think this is a very striking chart. And this is the big social trend that has been driving family breakdown, because couples who don't marry, and we all know this, couples who don't marry are very much more likely to split up. That doesn't mean they will, but it just means they're very much more likely to do so. And the result is this. This is essentially today's data from our latest big national household survey called Understanding Society in the UK. What we found is that 19% of couples with children are cohabiting today. But those 19% of cohabiting couples account for 50% of all family breakdown amongst couples. So they are disproportionately likely to split up. Now, some cohabiting couples also get married along the way. So some split up, some marry. The proportion who actually stay together, the green area in this chart, you can see how few actually make it from when their children are born. This is on today's rates, 30% of babies were born to unmarried cohabiting parents. But after 15 years, only 4% of the entire population of babies are living with intact unmarried parents. Very, very few. This essentially blows up the whole myth that long-term stable relationships happen outside of marriage. They are very much the exception. And Richard Kane alluded to this earlier. His data, I'm afraid, is from 2001. This is from 2010. 93% of intact couples with children are married today. And in 10 years' time, it'll still be about 90%. So the overwhelming majority of families who stay together are married. Overwhelming majority. If you want couples, if you want input from two parents to a child, if you want two parents with the extra capacity to look after the older generation, and I'm experiencing that because my mother just had a stroke. She's recovering very well, but my brother and I were able to support my mother because we have the spare capacity, because we are married, because we operate as a team. My darling sister, who's a single parent, struggles because she's at full capacity as a lone parent. And it really brought home to me this point that if we want couples to support the older generation as well as bring up our children, we need to back marriage. So that's the UK situation, and it's almost certainly true in almost any other country in the world. So what the data says in the UK is that married parents, about 4 out of 6 parents, will stay together while bringing up their children to age 16. So that's obviously not all. We're all flawed, we all fall short, as has been said earlier. But 4 out of 6 stay together, that's the majority. Only 1 out of 6 stay together if you're not married. Which category would you rather be in, especially if you're a child? Family breakdown is all about the trend away from marriage. Why might that be the case? And we've heard mention of Professor Scott Stanley in the United States already, but one of his theories, which is reasonably well known, and some of you may be familiar with this, is the theory of commitment, which talks about these two concepts of dedication and constraint. Let me try and explain this in English. That if you're two people, you are you and a me, and you get together, the two green arrows in the middle, you're a you and a me, and we get together, we're attracted to one another, and we enjoy each other's company, and we want to spend time together. And we begin to think of ourselves as an us. We start to form a green circle around the outside called us, the green blob. You've never thought of yourselves as a blob, but now you will. And you establish a new identity as being a couple, and you enjoy being a couple, so you think about a future together. And so when we talk about commitment, what we're talking about is the extent to which we see ourselves as a couple with a future, and that is what dedication is. So that's what we think of as commitment. And when we think about marriage, marriage is essentially the ultimate statement of dedication, isn't it? Because it is about being a couple with a permanent future. That's the plan. It doesn't always work out, but that's the general idea. So marriage is the ultimate act of dedication. Now there's another type of commitment which we don't think about very often, and this is the story of family breakdown. It's about constraints. what happens are that over time, as your relationship grows and you spend time together, you establish a past, a track record, a history, memories, photographs. And if things go wrong in your relationship, because you have memories and photographs and history, it's just that little bit, tiny bit more difficult. If you wanted to split up, it's more complicated. And that makes a constraint. That gives you puts a constraint from the outside on your relationship. The biggest constraint is moving in together. Because if you live together, the constraint is that if it doesn't work out, if dedication starts to drop and fail, then you've got to find a way of untangling your relationship and getting out of your relationship. And if you live together, it's obviously a lot more complicated to disentangle your relationship, find somewhere else to move to, than it is if you're not living together. So you can see that cohabiting, living together, whether you're married or not, the act of living together makes your relationship much more complicated. It adds a big constraint. Do you see what I mean? This is the second aspect of commitment, and we don't think about that. And cohabiting is the single largest constraint, more than any other. It's more than the legal aspect of marriage. It's more than even having children together, because people manage their children having split up. When people talk about being trapped in an unhappy marriage, what they really mean is being trapped in an unhappy living together. They don't talk about the legal difficulty of it going out of the marriage. They talk about the sheer complication of unravelling your domestic arrangement, finding somewhere else to go, and then trying to manage your children and all that stuff. So constraints are the other aspect of commitment which really define cohabiting. So when we marry, we affirm our dedication. We are a couple with a permanent future. When we cohabit, we establish an extra constraint. Think about it like a garden. Your relationship is like a garden. You like your garden, you like the flowers, it grows and it's lovely. And a wall pops up around the garden, and that wall feels great. You have children, you get married, you live together, you have friends and family who know about you and think about you as a couple. They are all constraints, and that wall, that constraint, is a positive thing, isn't it? It's nice being married, it's nice having children, when things are going well, obviously. But when your relationship starts to decay, if you stop seeing yourself as a couple with a future, dedication drops, the whole thing flips over, and that wall that protects you starts to become a prison sentence. It becomes a barrier, doesn't it? And people say, I feel trapped. Right? So you can move, when you move into a relationship, you can, the thing about cohabiting is that you can slide easily into living together, but it's extremely difficult to extract yourself. So the story of family breakdown, and you can see this in the data, which I don't have time for now, but I can talk about later if you like. What the story of family breakdown is couples moving in together too quickly, adding a constraint before they've established dedication, before they've established their sense of future, their plan for the future. And then they get trapped, and inertia carries you on into having a baby, and then it's all too difficult, we have to get out, and we escape. It takes a lot more to escape if you're living together than it does if it's not working and you're dating in the conventional sense. So that's the theory. So what does this tell us about how politicians might have contributed to family breakdown? Is it the case that we have weakened dedication, or is it the case that we have weakened constraints? That's really the question. If you want to find out if governments are responsible for family breakdown, is it by weakened dedication? Is it by making it less likely that couples will commit to one another? Or is it by weakening constraints on the outside, where you make it so much easier for couples to escape? Now, I think there are three ways that governments can influence the way that we behave. Through law, through signals, and through money. Those are the key levers that government has. I don't think law is the big deal. I just don't think it is. Because the constraint that stops people from, or that traps people in relationships, the biggest constraint, as I've mentioned already, is whether couples live together. It's the difficulty of extracting yourself from that that is the key deal, not the law on divorce that makes it easier or harder. People don't split up because it's easy to get divorced. They split up because and they are willing to overcome that terrible constraint of living together. Is it signals? I think government have been too relaxed about marriage. I think they've been too relaxed about cohabitation. But I don't think it's the signals. I don't think the signals have made the situation worse. And I don't think money is the problem either. Because, let's face it, they don't give huge amounts of money to cohabiting couples. In the UK, we have had a problem since 2003, where we've introduced a tax credit which makes it pay to the tune of £7,000, which is about €9,000 every year. It works to your advantage to live apart, and that is crazy. And maybe government has contributed. Remember, lone parenthood has risen since 1970 in a straight line. So I don't think that made very much difference. It is just more of the same. So, I'm going to say one thing and then I'm going to finish. Here's another thing to think about. Has government influenced policy on, has government influenced divorce? This is divorce rates for couples who married in 1970, 1980, 1990 and 2000. And you can see in the early years, in the first few years, divorce rates peak between years 3 and 6. But look at what happens when you get to year 10 of marriage. Every single year, regardless of when you married, in 1970, it's the same as the year 2000. The couples who've been married 10 years have the same divorce rates, the same trajectory. The nature of marriage hasn't changed in 50 years. Isn't that amazing? Once you get past 10 years, there's been no change. Astonishing. And that's why I'm relaxed about government doing whatever it wants to do about marriage, because it hasn't made any difference for the last 50 years. Okay, it changes in the early years. We're going to talk about that tomorrow. Has government policy made family breakdown worse? I don't think so. There's a bit of an incentive to live apart. The embrace of cohabitation doesn't help. I think the real culprits are the introduction of the pill, and I don't think we're very good at handling that. It's a brilliant invention, but I don't think we've done it very well. I think we're much too relaxed about how cohabitation increases constraints. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about how government policy can influence couples to stay together rather than split up. I think government can make a difference. But at the moment, the trend away from marriage is what causes family breakdown. And that's because of the introduction of the pill and cohabitation. And we've just not got very good at handling it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harry Benson, for your very thought-provoking contribution, especially reminding us that to understand family breakdown, we have to understand particularly the area of cohabiting couples, not just a marital family. Now, I've had to change the order slightly because of, unfortunately, Mrs. Zaborska has a problem getting to be with us through security. So we're going to let her gather her thoughts for a few moments before we ask her to speak. And instead, I'm going to ask Maria Hidingsson, who is married and Swedish, and Secretary General of the European Federation of Catholic Family Associations, to speak next. So let's welcome Mrs. Hidingsson.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well? Just speak loud enough. Yes. Let's see. So whilst we're waiting for the PowerPoint presentation to be on the screen, I'd like to share a short reflection, perhaps just coming from what we heard about what government can do or perhaps doesn't do and how much it has an influence on marriage and family breakdown. The organisation I work for, FAFCE, organised an event on the International Day of Families on the 15th of May this year to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the International Year of the Family. And we did this in Brussels at the European Economic and Social Committee, which is one of the institutions of the European Union. Among the speakers, we had a young man who is working for another NGO, the World Youth Alliance. And this boy, he comes from Poland. He's too young to remember what happened during the communist years, but he gave a very, very interesting illustration of how policy can try to interfere in family life. And you may know, or you may not know, that there is a triangular form of relationships between the state on the one hand, the family, and the individual on the other hand. Now, there is a temptation for policymakers to try sometimes to weaken the family so as to better dominate the individual. And this is what happened in Poland, at a point where they were building new houses, flats, and in the flats they had what they call blind kitchens. In other words, kitchens without any windows, because the kitchen is the place where you tend to meet as a family. And since they knew this, they tried to find a way to make the kitchen less pleasant. Now, you could imagine that you build new houses and you do the contrary. You make kitchens very pleasant places so as to give the family a place where to meet. So that's a short illustration of what can be done. Now, where do we stand in Europe when it comes to family breakdown and marriage breakdown and policies in general? First of all, family policy is not quite the same thing as social policy. Family policy is a preventive form of policy where investments are made to strengthen the family. In the case of the European Union, and a member of the European Parliament, Dr. Anna Zaborska, will certainly talk about this later, the European Union does not have a direct competence on family policy, but has competences in areas that will have a great impact on family. And one of the main concerns of the European Union today is demography. You can see here a statement made by the Commissioner for Social Affairs and Employment at the EU Demography Summit last year, where he's clearly saying that there is high unemployment for young people, there is a lack of stable income, and therefore difficulty for the young people to establish a home. And in return, that creates a problem when it comes to taking care of an aging population. And this is a big concern for Europe today. The low birth rates that we have in Europe are a rather strange phenomenon, because many surveys show that Europeans in general would like to have, in average, one child more than they do. So there is a gap between the fertility intention on the one hand and the fertility outcome on the other hand. And that can be, of course, for many, many different reasons. Unemployment leads to poverty, social exclusion. There is also a high degree of individualism in our society. The same young man who was talking about these blind windows in the kitchens in Poland, he also told us that many young people around him, he's less than 30, they have many connections, but they lack relations. They are connected to one another, but they are not related to one another. And in fact, there is a lot of psychological and mental suffering as a consequence of this. In the country where I come from, I'm Swedish, the main cause of death among our teenagers today is suicide. And I think that's an extreme alarm bell. In a country which is given, as we heard this morning when Richard Kane spoke, it's given as a model in many cases when you talk about family policy. But in fact, although Sweden has invested a lot of money into services and cash benefits for families, the real situation, what happens in relations between people and within the families, is a situation of deep suffering. And why is that? What could Europe change? And after all, what is really at stake in Europe? I think what is at stake is confidence in the future. And moreover, I've been based in Brussels since 2009, working on these issues at the European Union and with the Council of Europe. And I've seen that family has become a very political issue, which is today a bit difficult to handle. This is a picture from Paris last year. This is one of those huge demonstrations around the issue of marriage and adoption. And what really worries me is not that there are so many people in the street. On the contrary, I think it's important that people show in a very clear way where they stand. But what worries me is that countries such as mine and many other Western countries are promoting a certain social model, which is not the social model that countries in the eastern part of Europe, for example, would like to share and implement. And looking at the Council of Europe, where we have 47 member states, we can see that there are very, very different positions between the Western European states on the one hand and all those countries that have lived through communism. There is none of those states that have implemented the laws that open up possibilities to marry beyond being a man and a woman. And there is a clash in the understanding of family. I think this is our biggest challenge today, because family is the way to peace, but if we're not able to talk about family in a peaceful way, we will not be able to build a better society. So what can we do? I will make a very brief suggestion, but first of all, suggest incarnated politics. Politics that puts the person at the center, but also above everything else. So that the person is the starting point for employment policies, for financial policies, for economic policies. And there is a tool which is rather unknown, which was presented a bit more than 30 years ago, which is the Charter of the Rights of the Family. I work for a Catholic organisation, and this is a document which was presented by the Catholic Church more than 30 years ago, because the Catholic Church was very concerned with the rights of the family. And currently, the Catholic Church has started what is called a synod, which is the biggest possible meeting within the Church to talk about the challenges of family and marriage in society today. Youth are looking for role models, and I think one of the very simple things we can all do is talk about marriage, talk about family, and give testimony in a positive way as being a part to the integral development of society. And we certainly need to work more. We need to make efforts to be able to reach out and talk about this issue. Family and marriage are of course a very personal issue, but they're also a public issue. And since it is also a public issue, the public authorities also need to reflect on how to address these issues while respecting the integrity of family life. One of the big issues here is to offer an education to young people which will enable them to have stable relationships as adults. In many cases, we will hear about sexual education. Now, I come from a country where sexual education was made compulsory in the 1950s. It was the first country in the world. And still, what the young people in this country are asking for is, how do I make the relationship work? You don't learn that in those education courses. So you do need the testimony of those who are elder. And this will be my last point. There was a survey, an international global survey published last year called the Global Youth Survey. It's made with 6,500 youth from 12 countries across the world, between 16 and 29 years old. And there were two main features. This generation has since the 1960s been the generation that has had the most radical values, meaning that they were the ones asking for changes in society to happen. Now you'll see that there is a trend there in 1968 when things changed a lot, at least in Europe, in the Western world. But today, what these young people are asking for is something completely different. What they consider most worthy of respect are adults who have been good parents and kept their family together. And what they desire most for themselves is a family. And they want relationships that will last a lifetime. The basis for those relationships is also in the education. And this is where parents need to be supported, not replaced as educators. Many parents today, they feel that they don't have the capacity to educate. They are not a professional. But the first and the best experts are the mothers and the father of the child, who need to be supported and encouraged in this beautiful mission as educators. And we do know that this is part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, recognising both the family as being the basic unit of society and the parents being the first educators within that society. Now, I will not go further, but I'd just like to say that one other trend we need to shift from is that the family is not an object to be administered, but the family is a subject of rights. And there is a need to create awareness about this, both at the individual level, at the family level, and in society. And the families themselves have a very important role to play here. They should not forget that they can voice their needs, their wishes. And they do not need to do this alone. This is why there are NGOs, associations, networks, parents, families, and so forth. But the families themselves must not forget that they have a primary mission, which is the education of their own children. And they are the ones who will build the world of tomorrow. This is a campaign we launched for the European elections, which was signed by Mrs. Zaborska, among others. And we were calling on families to go and vote and make use of their capacity to influence politics. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hidingsson. Now we move on to our next speaker, who is Mr. Stacey, who is married, has a wife and 4 children living in Finland. He has taught marriage education at Lauri University near Helsinki, devised a couple relationship course, is working on the application of positive psychology to create a better marriage, and he's an expert on what governments worldwide are doing or not doing to support families. So let's welcome Mr. Stacey.
Okay, hello everyone. What do I turn this on? The value of marriage, to society. This morning we learned from some speakers, for example, that marriage is the primary school of love that we have as human beings. It's the place where our children learn respect, values, these kind of qualities. And it is most likely to happen if there's a mum and dad there to give the support they need. Yeah? Most likely. Doesn't mean it can't happen in single parent homes, but it's most likely to happen in both parents are there. It's our primary school of love. And if we want people to grow up to be loving, kind human beings, the family is an essential building block. Yeah? We learned that this morning. We've learned that it's the best place for outcome for men, women, children, the couple as a team, you mentioned cohabiting, and for society. We see prisons full in America, 2 million people in prison in America right now. Most come from broken homes, most, by far the overwhelming. Large drug problems, most came from distressed families. We have an issue, and we haven't quite understood it properly. Yeah? That actually as human beings, there's an issue. We haven't understood the central role of marriage. It's our way. It's our way of continuing health and getting you might see Mother Nature's blessings into human society, generation after generation. It's our way. And that's very profound to understand that it's our way. Yeah? I'd like you to look at this as I pulled off the internet. This is the USA, children born outside of marriage graph. And this is the national debt of America. Do you notice any similarities there? Children born outside of marriage in England. This is 1970s. And children, the national debt. It's incredibly expensive for governments to become the adopted parent to a single children. It's incredibly expensive for a government to look after single old people. My father has been looked after for 15 years by my mother. And it's and he would have needed help a long time ago. It's incredibly expensive to deal with the children who have behavioral problems, drug problems, etc., etc. We cannot afford it. We are going bankrupt. And you cannot, and this is a major challenge we have in the world today. If the marital family collapses, if people lose that sense of responsibility, that they are responsible for the children they brought into the world, if we lose that sense, this is my responsibility, even though I'm struggling with my partner sometimes, then we have only collapse. And this is the sense of responsibility, our divine ability to grow to love, our divine ability to grow up and mature. Years ago, we didn't have much support. Today, we have hundreds of programs in America, hundreds of counseling, and a lot of support to get through these issues. But we're not using them properly. This afternoon, we'll discuss that. We've got drug wars in Colombia, Mexico, thousands of families ripped apart, countries ripped apart because of divorce within America and Europe. You've got prostitution in various countries taking over. I can ask you to consider 10 years from now, 20 years from now, if China and India become divorce-centric cultures, and men have to travel abroad for their sex, to get their sexual needs, and their children. It will be an awful world in many, many countries. We cannot afford for those countries to go that way. So what conclusions can we draw? We are just like every other species on Earth. That's what my conclusion in my work over the last 10 years. We have one central way to exist as human beings, to pass blessings on to each generation. We have only one central way. Lions have purring. Nice for him. But maybe, but we don't work that way. We wouldn't work very well, and we wouldn't work very well if we had 10,000 children to look after. We have one central way, and that's our way. And that is us two people staying together to raise their kids, to take responsibility. And as soon as we stop doing that, we weaken as a species, we weaken as human beings, and our culture starts to collapse. And this is a very profound thought. It's a very deep thought that we only have one way. We cannot do anything else. All other ways lead to it. Yeah? And so you're left with a conclusion. Do we give up on marriage because it's not very good, which is what some people say, or do we try to improve it for the marital experience and support the marriage? And hopefully this afternoon we hear what various people do around the world. Secondly, kids. It's the kids that suffer. The pain of the individual parent who wants to divorce is passed on to the children and to society. It's the passing on of pain. If I want to walk away from that pain, it just gets passed on down. And the children suffer economically, educationally, and all these other ways. What happens then, we call it lineage decline happens in families that break up. Lineage decline. Lineage decline might be defined as a child at the age of 18, even though it's incredibly supported with education and all kinds of things today, has less chance of building their own family, marital family, than their parents did at 18. And that's what we see in the society today. today. Cohabitation is a direct result of lineage decline. Much of it is the fear to enter into a marital relationship because I saw my parents split up and divorce, and I went through hell. It's the fear. And so we have lineage decline entering. When the lineage decline enters en masse, we go into a spiral downwards as a society. Thirdly, we learn there's a definition. Two opposite sex people taking full responsibility to fulfill the rights of the child. If we didn't have the pill, as Harry talked about, if we didn't have the pill, we would all pretty much be parents by the time we were 21, 22. That's it. We would be a family-centered society. It would be our responsibility to take care of the children. The fact that we have social welfare systems, whatever, doesn't change that fact. It is our responsibility, because that's what our children want, and it brings about best outcomes for their lives. And if we've chosen to give a child life, it is our responsibility as humans, divine responsibility. So, why is it under attack? Why is it collapsing? If it's so good for men, women, children, society, why is it collapsing? It's collapsing because it's been under attack from every other social institution for the last 25, 30 years. It's been under attack from the media, from the politicians, from education, unsupporting of the education system, which has no interest in supporting marriage in most countries. In England, you have no Department of Marriage and Family. It costs $48 billion a year, the cost of distressed families, and there's no experts to solve the problem. No conferences, no learning curve, no nothing happening in England. Finland's the same. America luckily has private universities, departments, and doing an incredible job there. But Europe has really suffered from education. How can we improve the marital experience? Most religions still find it hard to develop educational interventions that help. The most effective way we find is through religious. And lastly, the rise of contraceptives. It's created a secondary culture. There's two parallel. Instead of having a family cultures, we've created two parallel cultures. An individualistic culture that wants its own right, and a culture that's struggling to raise children more and more, because they're completely different from each other. And it's being attacked, and no social institution can survive such an attack. Basically, since we only have one way to pass on blessings, fundamentally, it's generation, thousands of years, all institutions have to understand, to catch that, and it is their role to support the marital-family institution. It's our way. It becomes our way, and they have to change that. There's lots of ways we can talk about this, the media, but I'd just like to bring up one subject here. This definition, two opposite sex people taking responsibility to fulfill the rights of their children. Now, what politicians have done across the world, in the Western world, every time they make a law around marriage, they weaken the social understanding of that responsibility. They weaken it. And that's what we're seeing across, and that's why more and more people are not fulfilling their responsibility. So, two opposite sex, when you change to, when we developed no fault divorce, it changed the social understanding that it's sometimes it's not necessary for parents to do that. And as soon as they said that, we see this divorce rates go shooting up. And people say, it's not my job. I don't have to live with this tough time. I can pass it on to somebody else to deal with. It's not my responsibility to go to marriage education courses or develop myself or improve myself or whatever. Somebody else can do that. And that was a poorly defined law, and it needs changing. Absolutely. There's a divorce reform website, and it offers other suggestions. And what this did, what does this no-fault divorce redefine the social understanding of marriage? It redefined it in the social sphere. It said a parent's right to happy is more important than a child's best chance in life. It gave adult a priority to the adult over the child. So adults are more important than children. It said it's about my rights, not about my responsibility. It became my right. I can do whatever I want. I leave my kids, do whatever I want. I don't have to do anything. It said parents shouldn't have to go through a difficult time. I have been through difficult times. Every parent has been through difficult times. Every marriage has been through difficult times, but we get through them. There are natural difficult times in marriage, especially after the birth of children. But this law said you shouldn't have to go through them. Duh. That's like saying, be a good child, just grow up, will you? No, it doesn't work like that. And we grow through these difficulties. It is our growth, natural. It's a natural growth thing. But it said, you don't have to struggle. You shouldn't have to. It said it's harmful to stay house. Absolutely no. Unless if there's violence, so of course we can say, don't go there, don't stay. But even in struggling marriage, children are still getting the support of two parents. They're doing better educationally. Their rights are still being upheld in many areas, far better than their parents do. Okay? And anyway, and of course, because it weakened the understanding of the child's right, they suffered poorer outcomes. And that's what we see today from Sweden, divorce, suicide, depression, drug taking, etc. Some states have now changed even further. We've changed the law so many times that the social understanding is so much about adults' rights instead of adults' responsibility towards fulfilling the child's right, that they've introduced same-sex marriage. And they've changed the definition of social definition once more, again of marriage, the right of any two adults to make a public commitment based on mutual sexual. So that's now the social definition in those countries. Duh, what's missing? The children. My responsibility to grow up and to become an adult through raising my children. And it's no longer, and such a definition will absolutely create more problems for the future children. Absolutely, because they're not there. Children are no longer there. Children lost the right to be raised by their biological parents in that law change. It may suit same-sex people or people who don't want children, but it doesn't suit people who want children. And that's what marriage has always been about, that taking responsibility for your children. And we see in the statistics in all those countries a rapid decline in heterosexuals marrying, because they said, well, what's the point? Marriage isn't about the kids, it's not about protecting children. So we see it didn't strengthen marriage as all the people said. It weakened marriage among heterosexuals and raising kids. So lastly, the state needs to ensure that they don't weaken the social understanding of human responsibility towards their children. It's my choice to find someone I love. It's my responsibility to grow old with that person and find ways. In the past, we didn't have marriage education programs. We didn't have support system. We didn't have marriage counseling. Today, we have loads of stuff. But the law is reflecting, especially many laws, just say, we don't have that stuff. We don't, to help people. They should do it. It shouldn't be like that. Yeah? And we need to change our attitude and say, get on your bike, you're struggling, there's lots of support out there for you. How can we do that? Governments have promoted people who stop people from in a range of ways, harmful laws which harm marriage. And maybe Josie will talk about this afternoon or tomorrow. But it's far cheaper to spend $2,000 on marriage counseling for a divorcing couple. In Finland, they reckon it costs €1 million to deal with a child who had the Preventive is far better. But we typically only give the money after they separate. This has to change. Thank you very much. My slides, which hopefully will go to everybody, I've given a range of websites which are useful for a range of issues. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Stacey. Our next speaker, now happening with us, is Maria Zaborska, who is a member of the European Parliament, part of the Christian Democratic Movement, and part of the European People's Party group within the European Parliament. She comes from a medical background, was originally a physician, has held the chair in the past of chair of the Committee on Women's Rights and Gender Equality in the European Parliament. She's also been responsible for an initiative to monitor search engines to prevent paedophilia, an initiative to persuade the European authorities to take up that responsibility. She's a pro-life campaigner, so please let's welcome Maria Zaborska.
Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs, je suis très heureuse d'être ici parmi vous et je remercie beaucoup les organisateurs d'avoir organisé cette conférence. Il m'est très agréable de me trouver parmi vous à cet instant afin d'échanger quelques idées touchant aux valeurs qui nous tiennent tous à cœur. Je veux dire la famille. Les 10 valeurs, jadis considérées comme un fondement de notre civilisation, sont depuis quelques décennies remises en question. Cette année, à l'occasion du 20e anniversaire de l'année internationale de la famille, il nous est donné opportunément, au sein de cette conférence aussi, de conduire notre réflexion sur les raisons de ces changements que je viens d'évoquer. Aussi, nous tenterons conjointement d'en cibler les causes et d'esquisser des remèdes appropriés. Parallèlement, il serait bon de sonder les liens éventuels qui régissent les intérêts politiques et ceux de la famille. En premier lieu, j'aimerais souligner une particularité de la famille. En effet, ceci n'est pas seulement une réalité publique et sociale, la famille est une entité qui resserre en elle-même des valeurs personnelles, s'étendant jusqu'à la sphère intime. Si paradoxalement,
it can seem to be a happy oasis or a suffering place, it goes beyond the political field of intervention and creates the favorable condition to its development. The Occidental concept of the family is about the union of a man and a woman in marriage, and the first function of this exclusive and unique union is reproduction, mutual care, and education of future generations. Through a few statistics, let's look at the family breakdown. In the OCDE countries, we can see that for 40 years there have been fewer and fewer marriages, more than 30% marriages less. And in those statistics, there's also remarriages. Symmetrically, the number of divorces have exploded to more than the double in the same period. Before, people would marry and promise to be married until death would separate them. It's not honored in our days anymore. And right now, marriages last between 10 and 15 years. The divorce procedure has become more simple and accessible to all status of society, and the consequence has been a new economical situation that makes that the families have less income. So most families, single-parental families like the mother and her children, have a difficult situation in poverty and misery. First, the purpose of the family policies was about helping families in their material difficulties, contributing to the education of their children. But bit by bit, this objective has become extended to aged people. So through those ways, the state has been able to help families in taking away the people from their responsibilities and taking them from the familial solidarities. So the state has become a concurrent to favoring the separation of marriage and procreation. And in this way, the concept of the role of each generation has changed. The children don't represent an investment for the future and the hope to have a person next to you that would love you and help you in all the days. This role has been given to the retirement benefits, and the state has indifferently helped married couples or not without asking from them an investment or having them really invest in marriage. So it's a boomerang that we observe, and more and more children are born out of marriage. Our society has invested in the way of equality for all. We have adopted the Charter for Children's Rights, and those texts are just hopes, because the notion of helping has become rights. It's the new role that the state has, that is to take responsibility for the family and children. So the state has recognized the minimum revenue of the family and has taken the right to decide about education and about the access to teaching. So the state doesn't just help serving the family, but it has its action to normalize relations in the family. And to have this ambition asks for an incredible huge amount of investment that has a problem, that has consequences in the budget. Now, we ask ourselves a question: why is the family breaking down? Shouldn't we ask this problem in a different way? What function the family should assume nowadays? The functions of the family are, let's say, taken over by the state, and that's not a good consequence to take the responsibility away from the parents. The state is encouraging living away responsibility and to take over the needs of the children, and in education, health, taxes, and doesn't take the family in consideration anymore. The parents. Let's take an example. in the European Parliament during a debate on the maternal leave, there was a new demand that we don't talk about women that are pregnant, but working women. Maternity was taken that the woman, the mother, has to take a leave as a vacation. And the role of the mother at home is not taken into consideration anymore. We reduct the notion of marriage to a romantic expression and don't talk about parental responsibilities and reproduction. So the state is taking over in the family life, but it doesn't want to talk about natality, which is a very important factor in its own existence. So if we talk about the traditional family, which is natural, on one hand, there is less natality, and on the other hand, there's inequality of revenue, and we don't talk of that very much. Children that come from single-parent families, they have a much higher risk to become poor. According to Heritage Foundation, at least 80% of the children in the US come from broken families or non-married families. And the child educated by a single mother has 7 times more risk to live in a difficult situation than if it were educated by parents living together. In order not to finish in a negative conclusion, let me suggest a few possibilities to reform to just familial policy. First of all, to safeguard the institution of marriage as an exclusive union between a man and a woman who decide to share the rights and the needs in taking care of the children. Secondly, to take into consideration the families with many children in the social and health system. Third, to confirm the responsibility of parents in the education and instruction of their children. And fourth, recognize the work of the mother at home and include it in the structure of the national product. And fifth, to apply in a coherent way the principle of subsidiarity to help families in difficulty. We can place all those suggestions in the family mainstreaming. It's about taking into consideration the positive impact and negative impacts that all the members of the European Union will adopt in the exercise of their power towards the family. This is confirmed by the OECD that recommends directly in many documents to support the families. It proposes a support in the framework of fiscality of families with children, flexibility of work, and encouraging all the measures that support parents in the education of their children. And happiness is associated to freedom, activities, and interests and responsibility, as was formulated in Konrad Adenauer's foundation. And this can be realized within the framework.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Zaborska, for a very wide-ranging
review of
trends and policies in this whole area of marriage and family, and giving us your expertise from European Parliament and from Eastern Europe especially.